Welcome everyone to our monthly DRISS Presents TEACH-RS seminars. Just as a reminder, this is a once a month seminar that occurs on the second Friday of the month from noon to 1. We have one more seminar in this series, which will be on May 9th, and that will be the last one for our academic year. So my name is Barb King, and I'm a professor in the School of Nursing and the current faculty lead for the DRISS Presents TEACH-RS series this academic year. And I have a great pleasure of introducing Dr. Kristen Pecanac. Dr. Pecanac is an associate professor and the Helen, Denne, Schulte Professor of Nursing in the School of Nursing at UW-Madison. Dr. Pecanac's research explores interactions among healthcare practitioners, patients, and family members when making decisions related to treatment in the hospital setting. Her intent is to identify communicative practices that promote patient and family participation in decision-making and incorporate these practices into an intervention. The ultimate goal of this research is to facilitate engagement and productive conversations that lead to reduced stress and suffering for patients and their family members. And joining Dr. Pecanac is Rasaki Emmanuel. Rasaki has been a dedicated member of the advisory group through Goodman, the Community Advisors for Research Design and Strategies, or CARDS. He's been in this group for 13 years. The CARDS members share actionable, candid, and valuable feedback on research project plans and public-facing materials to make them easier to read, more engaging, and more inclusive. Rasaki is appreciated within the CARDS group for his creativity and his gentle way of helping researchers see new perspectives. Rasaki is also a devoted father and husband. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Pecanac and Rasaki to take it from here. I look forward to the presentation.
Thank you so much, Barb. We're going to point up my slides here. All right, so today we're going to talk a bit about our experience in starting a community advisory board and what that looked like in moving a project forward. And as part of that, working with the CARDS group. So the title of our presentation is From CARDS to CAB and then Back Again. I'd like to acknowledge funding that I received from ICTR to support this research study. So I proposed in that ICTR proposal, the overall purpose was to have people with lived experience review real-world communication strategies and discuss which are preferred or not preferred to include in a communication training. So I'll break this down a little bit more. So have people with lived experience. As Dr. King mentioned, my work is around treatment decision-making. And for this particular study, I was interested in having people who have experienced being a surrogate decision maker for a patient who needed a major medical treatment decision in the hospital setting. So it could be something like whether or not to start dialysis, place a feeding tube, take somebody off a ventilator, engage with resuscitation, have major surgery. So those types of decisions. And what I wanted to do was have them review real-world communication strategies. There's been a lot of work already in this space where people interview former surrogate decision makers to ask them about their experiences, or even asking very specifically about the conversation, how it went. But there hasn't really been any work done where they asked people to review real communication strategies that clinicians had used during surrogate decision-making conversations, and then discuss what they thought about them. And so I had, in a prior study, audio recorded clinician and surrogate decision-maker conversations where they had to make one of these major medical treatment decisions. And so I brought those quotes, if you will, to the community advisory board and have them discuss which are preferred and which are not preferred, and overall what they thought about the different communication strategies. And that really helped me to decide which to include in a communication training that I would use for clinicians to help them prepare for these really difficult conversations that they have with surrogate decision makers. So my overall plan was to form a community advisory board, again, folks who had experience with surrogate decision making. I also wanted to have all members identify as Black or African American. This was important to me because in my prior work where I had done all the audio recording was majority of white surrogates. And in thinking about next steps of developing a communication training, I wanted it to be something that was going to be useful for clinicians in talking to surrogates with different races. And so I want it to be not just serving white surrogates. So with this community advisory board, we had 3 different meetings, and I'll just talk about these fairly briefly about what this looked like, and we'll go into a little bit more detail later. But the first meeting was really more just about introductions and building community with each other. And then the second and third meeting was going to be, the plan was going to be, we were going to talk about these different communication strategies of these 4 phases of the surrogate decision-making conversation. So we focused the second meeting on phase 1 and 2, how to start on the same page and how to talk about the patient's prognosis. And then meeting 3, we focused on phase 3 and 4 of how to elicit patient values and how to solicit what the patient would choose. So this was my overall plan. This is what I had proposed in my grant proposal. And these were the 4 different quotes that, just to give you an example of what I had thought the CAB would be going through. So just going through those different quotes, talking about what they liked, what they didn't like, and what their overall reaction was to these different communication strategies. So I knew Ictor thought this was a good plan because I did get funding, but was this a overall good plan? And was what I was really interested in was how are we going to make this work? I had this vision of what this would look like, but how do we actually make it work in the real world with real people? So I had put in my proposal to have meetings with the CARDS. And CARDS is a community advisors of research design and strategies. There's a couple of different groups. This picture is of the Goodman group, which Rasaki is a member of. And they give feedback on any aspect of your research project. And for me, I was really interested in bringing that research plan and that actionable plan of this is what I think I want to do and how do we think this is actually going to work. And so I worked really hard with Kat and Kim of Winners to think through what were the best ways to talk to CARDS about this plan and get the best feedback. So in overall thinking about how to start a new CAB, certainly thinking about the actual, what are you going to do in the meetings, but also just trying to get a sense as preparing to start the new CAB in general. I had talked to everybody individually when I was recruiting and going through the consent process, but that very first meeting is so critical because you're showing who you are and what you're all about, what you want to do. And so it really sets the stage for the rest of the CAB meetings. And I wanted to make sure that I got it right. So I had the CARDS members review my community advisory board orientation presentation. So I went through my PowerPoint presentation and they offered me some feedback. And in the same meeting, we also did try out that activity that I was hoping to do with the quotes, and they offered feedback on that as well. The way that we did it with the CARDS members is we mailed out just 4 quotes, just for one of the phases, to all the CARDS members. They received it in the mail, and that way they were able to review it before they got to the CARDS meeting. And then during the CARDS meeting, they discussed the 4 quotes in breakout rooms. And eventually they came back and discussed those different quotes in a large group. Okay, so I got a lot of feedback, as I'm sure anybody who has engaged with the CARDS will probably attest that they have as well. A couple of things that they noted was using UW School of Nursing slides. I had just chosen a random design and layout, and that was not well received at all. So as you can see, I've learned, and I'm using my School of Nursing slides here today. Something else that they mentioned was adding pictures of team members. I thought it was important for them to know who all was involved, even people who weren't going to be attending the community advisory board meetings. So they thought it was important to show pictures so they can just get an idea of who people were. Also for people who were at the meetings to have those pictures so they could kind of be able to see who was who and what their role was going to be as part of the team and helping with the community advisory board. One of the things that they had me work on, and I'm still working on, is using more of that inclusive language. So I had slides talking about my team, and when you have a community advisory board, is it really your team or is it everyone's team, right? If you are all working together. So changing some of that up to our team, our goals, which I'll talk about a little bit more, but just being more inclusive to help with that, to share that we are all working on this together. Another feedback that I thought was really interesting was, I'm so used to my elevator pitch of who I am and why I do this work, which, as I'm sure many of you share, came from my clinical experiences. And so I just kind of had a slide saying, this is who I am and this is why I'm doing this. And I just talked and used talked about my experiences as I've had so many times. But they felt it was a little bit hard to follow because I didn't have any bullet points or anything to really center what I was saying. And so I did develop a graphic to describe the why for my research, which I think was pretty helpful. And then lastly, what's super important is that we hired Edith as part of the project team. One of the biggest red flags that the cards had for my project was that nobody on our research team shared racial identity with the members of the community advisory board. And so Edith was actually a member of the cards and was really interested in this work. And we're so delighted that she joined our team and really helped make the community advisory board and this entire project a success. I feel like I got a lot of feedback, mostly on the orientation presentation, which was great. But as far as the actual activity, cards members generally like the activity, and watching it play out and kind of getting a sense of what it looked like was also just extremely helpful for us. One of the things that we did note is just clarifying what people were actually supposed to be talking about in the different breakout rooms. And this may be particular because the cards members are so skilled and experts at giving feedback and modifying language and editing language. They wanted to cross out all the quotes and come up with their own. But truly what I was most interested in was, when somebody says that, how does that make you feel? Are there any of these that you really dislike? Are there any of these that you really like? Kind of trying to get more of that more global idea of the different communication strategies. And so it was helpful to see what kinds of directions to give our community advisory board moving forward. And so I know one of the focuses of the DRISS is on recruitment. So I did want to, of course, mention about recruitment for the community advisory board, which is such a huge part of it. And I know you've heard this probably 1,000 times, but building community relationships is essential. I will say that there were things that we did that was intentional, and I will say that there are things that we did where we just got lucky. And so I'll talk about both of those. The first thing that we did, I worked with Kat Phelps from the Wisconsin Network for Research Support, which is Winners, and they were so fantastic throughout this entire project and really helping me with this. This was my very first community advisory board. It's also my very first time recruiting in the community. It's not something I had really done before. All of my work has been so centered on hospitals, and so I've only recruited in hospitals aside from a survey which just got sent to random addresses. So this entire process was very new to me. And so she is so networked with members of the community, and she introduced me to leadership at Lusher Community Education Center. We had a delightful meeting. I think there were maybe about 10 of us in the room, and similarly, just talking about who I am, what I was looking to do, talked about recruitment. We landed on having me have a flyer that I was able to post kind of in the main room of the Lucier Community Education Center and with some contact information. So I had a QR code, a phone number, as well as an email address for people to reach out. And it seemed, and so I felt like I had a lot of support from that community center to do that. I was talking about with luck. I would say this is where I got very lucky. I developed a relationship with staff at Lucier Community Education Center. The person who worked the front desk was really interested in the study and said that there were so many people who came up to her and asked questions, and she's like, I don't know the answers. And so she called me to get a sense. She's like, I just want to know a little bit more about you and what you're doing. So we had a really lovely conversation, and it was really nice to get a sense to what information was important for her to have. And after we talked, there was a lot more interest that I received from people participating in this research study. So that was really nice. Part of my discussions with leadership at Lucier, so that very first meeting that we had, a comment was made about how this study eventually is going to help clinicians, if you think about most directly, because I was going to be developing a communication training for clinicians. And so there's a little bit of concern about providing resources and giving back a little bit more support for the people who are actually making this decision, which was very valid. And so one of the things that they were requesting was more information about advanced directives and advanced care planning conversations, and how that gets applied in these types of situations. And so I delivered a presentation on advanced directives at the Lucier Community Education Center at one of their senior brunches. And I did that pretty late in the recruitment. Everybody had been recruited at that point, but it was just a way to give back to the Community Education Center. It was something that they thought was valuable, and so I was really happy to provide that for them. And I got the attendance at the senior brunch was pretty good. I got some really great questions, and so I thought that that was a really great experience. As I mentioned, I'm new to all of this. In the hospital setting, I usually just talk to folks day of, and then they're in the study, and we collect data, and it's all very quick. So this recruitment process of people talking to me, it was really interesting. Nobody used the QR code on my flyer. As a millennial, I was really expecting that to be a hit, and it wasn't. Most people talked to me and called me on the phone, and I've been used to people telling me their stories. These types of situations are really difficult, even traumatic for some people. And so that in and of itself, I wasn't necessarily surprised about. What did surprise me a bit is how much they talked about, end of life, these types of situations. This is important. Communication needs to be improved. But there's a lot of work that needs to be done in communication, like just day-to-day basis, primary care, specialty care, labor and delivery. There's like, this is fine. I'll participate in the study. Let's consider this a step one. But there's a lot of work that you could still be doing. And so I thought I really appreciate those conversations. And I will say we continued them in the community advisory board, which I'll talk about a little bit more. I also recruited through the cards as well, which was really helpful. People were present when I had gone through the cards meeting, were interested in the study. So that was great to get some participants from there. And I was hoping to have around 7 to 10 members of my community advisory board, our community advisory board, so he's still working on it. And had 10, which is great. This is my very first study I ever had the upper limit of my desired sample size. So really excited about that. Again, a lot of hard work and help from winners and members of the Lucier Community Education Center, which I'm really grateful for. So CAM meetings, I talked about a little bit more about the logistics of what that would look like, but want to talk a bit more about where we landed. So we did decide to have all meetings virtually. And this was something that I asked everybody about during recruitment, was whether they preferred virtual or in person. And most people said they didn't care. And there were a few who said virtual would just be much easier for them to participate. And so that's why we landed with having all 3 meetings being virtual. Winners facilitated all 3 meetings. I cannot say enough great things about them in helping me out with that. This was my very first time doing a community advisory board, which I think I've said 3 times now. So just them being able to set the agenda and kind of work through what the activities would be and what this all would look like was just invaluable to me. One of the other resources that we had with this study, as I mentioned, these types of situations of making a major treatment decision for a loved one, particularly if it does end up for the patient passing away, is that they're very distressing, they can be dramatic. And so I had somebody on my team who's a student of mine. He has done a lot of work in psych on trauma studies. So he's had a lot of training with folks with trauma experiences and what to do if somebody has a distressing episode. And so we had him on the team, and he was present at all the CAB meetings. And if at any point anybody felt that they needed a break or wanted to debrief with him and just have one-on-one that space, we would put them into a breakout room just together until they were ready to join back in or decide they wanted to leave. That didn't happen in any of the 3 meetings. Nobody did that, but I heard from pretty much everybody I recruited that was really important to them, that I had thought about that, and that we did have that resource available if they needed it. So so I think it was good to have that for the meetings. For the opening meeting, it was really important to us to not have any research business. As I mentioned, it was really just about introductions, building community, and developing some mutual goals. And that was a really nice kind of learning experience for me throughout this. Is again, it wasn't just my goals, it was our goals, and giving folks space to share what was important to them. I certainly did have my goals, and I had things that we needed to do that I had proposed in the grant proposal. But I wanted to talk to people and get their ideas about what was important to them and how we could potentially merge the two to have a successful project. One of the other things in building community, it's hard when you do have people some people knew each other, but not everybody. And you do want that to build that community space with each other, because we were going to be talking about some pretty difficult conversations. So it was tricky for us to figure out, okay, what do we talk about in that first meeting? Because you're in a room full of strangers, virtually and tell me about one of the worst days probably of your life, right? And so what we did was we had our question be, tell me why you decided to join this community advisory board. And that left space open. If people felt comfortable sharing personal experiences, they could. If they wanted to just share more generally why they were there, that was fine too. So I think that worked really well for people to get to know each other and just get a general sense as to why everybody was there. And then we discussed the agenda for the subsequent 2 meetings. And the way those they looked pretty close to what I had initially proposed and what we did with the cards meeting, because that did work pretty well. One change that we made was with the quotes. We didn't mail them out ahead of time. We just had them be read out loud first before showing them on the screen. So we had a PowerPoint. And this was intentional. It was interesting, and it still is an interesting methodological issue, because certainly the way that we hear things in a conversation and we react to them might be different from reading and reflecting them on the page, right? And so we decided to have them be read out loud first to kind of try and recreate and get people thinking about how they were feeling as they were being read before we showed them on the screen. So that was just one change that we made. Otherwise, the activity is pretty consistent with what we had proposed to do. And we had 10 people who were in the community advisory board. So we had breakout rooms of 5 people each. One of the things I think surprised a lot of people on the team was that the breakout room discussions actually looked pretty similar to each other, and there was quite a bit of consensus, I would say, folks of what types of communication they enjoyed and what didn't work so well. All right, so I will open the floor to Rasaki to talk about his experience in being a member of the CAB.
Hi everyone, my name is Rasaki Emmanuel, and I remember 15 years ago when CARS was when Barb Bowers was given a grant for CARS, and the recruitment for CARD members, it was very interesting, but it was an opportunity for the wording of medical information to be supported or made clearer. And the good thing about it is, over the course of years, we've came across a lot of great researchers with their research information, and it has made people want to participate in, in the research more because of the clear information. And every researcher has had a great opportunity to make a difference in their in the medical field, but it was the opportunity that they gave the community to help them. Because for what it's worth, there's a lot of people that's not as educated, but they need the help to get better. And being able to sit down with a researcher that's very intelligent and want to help, but they have to adjust the information, has been a great success. And the step up, step back has been great as well. CARD members is been made up of more than 12 people, so having that room to everybody's opinion and nobody being offended, but being in supportive to the researcher. Um, and I'm just grateful that this in particular study, I experienced myself with a decision making with my mom. And it was the conversation that we had over a course of time that helped me support what she wanted. And I think that that's a key value to supporting people.
Thanks so much, Rasaki. Do you want to talk a little bit more about your experience in being a member of the Community Advisory Board and working through and talking about the different quotes and that you did in the breakout rooms?
Yes, the that this particular study, the breakout room was it was very good because we we as car we as members, we learned the the information that the the medical field have, this strategy that was given. Some of it was very unclear and distracting, but at the end, we was able to get together and make a decision that made comfort for everybody.
Thank you. And we'll share a little bit more about what Rasaki is talking about here. Let me first talk about developing the different goals that we had as a community advisory board. As I mentioned, the very first meeting, we talked about mutual goals, and those first three really did influence how we talked about the different communication strategies that we saw clinicians use. So we would ask members of the community advisory board, is saying it this way, does it help you prepare to make a decision? Or which of these seems more empathetic? Or do any of these seem like the healthcare team sharing their personal thoughts instead of their medical expertise? So it was really helpful to have those goals in the beginning to really influence how we were talking about the different communication strategies and making sure that we were hitting those points that were important to the community advisory board members. And then the last three goals that we see here are really more inspiring future research. And in particular, this idea of having advocates and people from the community in the healthcare setting. This is inspiring our next project, which we've already started, of thinking about what that advocate could look like. It's a bit heartbreaking as a nurse to hear that it's needed, because nurses are called to be patient advocates, but recognizing that there can be another role and there needs to be more support is really helpful. And so that's some work that we have started in January, actually, as we move through here. So this is getting to what Rasaki was talking about, of things, not being clear and distracting. I think this is something I could cite at least 50 articles, if not more, maybe hundreds, that say clinicians need to have clear, direct, honest language. And I think that when we hear that, and particularly clinicians like me, when I hear this, the first thing we think about is jargon, right? Oh, we just can't have jargon. But there are actually some manners of speech and language that we use that is not helpful and unclear. So one of those examples is using crystal ball references. Very, very common for clinicians to say, I don't have a crystal ball, but, I think X, Y, Z about what's going to happen next. And people really disliked these crystal ball references. They felt that they were very distracting and would prefer clinicians to just say, I think X, Y, and Z might happen. Another really interesting thing that we learned was worry statements. People had a very visceral reaction to clinicians talking about worry. So saying something like, I'm worried they might not recover from this, or something similar. Worry statements are taught. They're in the Serious Illness Communication Guide. So I know that it's something that clinicians get some training in. However, it was very clear in our 2 breakout rooms that are separate, both rooms were just really unhappy about these worry statements. And again, being worried about something, people said it didn't help them at all to feel that their clinicians were worried. Are they personally worried? Is it a medical worry? Do they need to be worried? So that just was very unclear. And so instead, just saying something like, I don't think that they will recover from this, would be much more clear and direct. And then just another example, things like this came up so often, so that people would have a very long conversation, maybe about a feeding tube, and then say, like, have you talked about things like this? And instead of just saying that, be real clear, like, have you talked about feeding tubes, or have you talked about, maybe being kept alive by treatments or something like that? Just being really clear, because it can be really hard and distracting to circle back to what exactly you mean by things like this. So overall, the outcomes of this study, there were many in this entire project experience. We did develop a communication training for healthcare providers, and shared that at our end of the study celebration in March, where community advisory board members could bring a guest, which was really great, because then everyone could see what we've all been up to in the past 6 months. And yes, we did all of this in 6 months, which is incredible. We had our very first meeting in September, and then we had our end of study celebration in March. So this all, it was pretty amazing type of experience to have in just 6 months. So being able to share that and show how the training really did reflect the communication strategies that people preferred or dispreferred as well. In the community training, I include both, so that clinicians can kind of see different examples. And as I mentioned, we did start another research project on this healthcare advocate initiative. We had our very first meeting in January. So really at the start, this is such an amazing project. This is not something I would have ever thought about or considered in thinking about communication. Again, I have my very tunnel vision, which I feel like a lot of us do, of X, Y, and Z. I do this study, I do that study, I develop the intervention, then I test it, right? So it was really great to have that conversation about what is important to all of you. And this idea of having a healthcare advocate was really interesting and I think plausible. So we had our very first kind of who, what, where, when meeting to figure out what this would look like, and to try and move this forward. And it seems like it's something that's really important to people. And so it's something we're going to work on implementing. So we're going to, as a community advisory board, continue to connect every 6 months, either by email or meeting, to keep this healthcare advocate initiative moving forward. And this is something that was also a little bit surprising to me. You know, again, as someone who's never done this before, I was like, design my study, we have 3 meetings and then we're done, you know, I'll have my training and then I'll move forward. But the members of the community advisory board were always kind of like, well, when are we going to see you again? And what's next? And how can we help? And, you know, I invited anybody who wanted to work on the healthcare advocate initiative to join and everybody showed up. So it's really been great to have so much support in working together to really address this issue of how clinicians communicate in the healthcare setting. And in this healthcare advocate initiative in particular is not necessarily end of life. Again, I heard over and over again, end of life, this is important. Those conversations are important, but we have to also think about other conversations that are really difficult for folks and how we can improve healthcare overall. So really broadening here and hoping we can make a lot of progress on that. And then back again, as promised. So went back to the cards. I shared this presentation and as might be expected, did get some feedback. Rasaki and I did a little practice run a couple months ago with this presentation. But really a lot of the why we did that was to kind of close the loop and really show that their comments and feedback, how instrumental that was to help strengthen this community advisory board project and really help me to move on to that next steps and to continue working with the community advisory board, which I'm so grateful for. So very thankful for the cards and for my community advisory board members as well. And with that, I'll leave it up to any questions or reflections that you have for me or Rasaki. Stop my slides so we can see each other.
Kristen, there is a question in the chat that was somebody just threw out, what is the difference between cards and a cab? So maybe can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, so the cards there's a couple of different groups, but they are a community advisory board. And they are housed within the School of Nursing and Winners in particular. So they're a group that if you have anything that you'd like feedback on for a study, you can go to. Whereas the Community Advisory Board was a group that I formed very specifically to work on this research project. And so, as you can see, we're going to continue working together, but it was really just for this project in particular, and working on this work in particular.
If I can add to what she was speaking on,
Yeah.
The cards are the original board, but the cap is her she is the people in her particular study that had hands-on experience, if that makes sense.
Thanks for adding that, Rasaki.
So I have a thought about listening to your presentation, Kristen and Rasaki. You know, I think from prior research that I've been engaged in the literature, individuals are really hungry to partner with healthcare providers and researchers to improve patient care delivery and that experience. And I don't know if we really grasp as clinicians and researchers how critically important that is to improving what we do. And Any additional thoughts you have on that, or anybody else that might want to jump in on your thoughts on that? I think it is underappreciated and underestimated, the critical need for to partner.
Mhm. Yeah, I think, and I would say as researchers, it also can be a bit overwhelming. And we just don't know where to start, especially if that's new for us, like in my situation, it was. So certainly, working with winners helped, but if I had gone, it was also really helpful, I think, to go in with a research study, to have some of my own goals and then open up for different goals to then get another direction. I think it would have been just tricky for me just to form a group and say, you know, what's important to you, and starting there. I think that this was nice because we already had some momentum to move forward. And so certainly there's different ways to do it, but for someone who is new to working with a community advisory board, I thought that doing this type of method with working with winners, getting feedback from the cards, and then working with the community advisory board, and then moving forward with a research direction that was most important to them, has just been a really nice model.
There's also a couple of questions in the chat, Kristen. There's one about from Clement. You shared how the communication feels, but how was the faculty moved to a more, it's shifting to a more engaged community research? Can you respond to that? Any additional thoughts?
Yeah, I would say definitely this experience has helped me I've developed a lot of strategies, certainly with working with winners, on how to have more community engaged research moving forward. So I think this whole experience has been really helpful for me to kind of have that moving forward.
Mhm. Then there's another question about, were the CAB members compensated, and if so, how was that decided?
So, yep. So CAB members were compensated for all 3 meetings, as well as our bonus meeting on the healthcare initiative as well. And so I asked winners kind of what was most reasonable as far as payment went. So that was also really helpful to have that information as well.
Picori also has on their website, they did have some information about how to consider compensation for individuals who are serving on a community advisory board. So if you go to their site, you have to sift through it, but you can find, like, this is what you should be compensating people for. You have another one in there for cards. How do you / have you had to increase the demand for cards in your institution? If so, what strategies did you use? You might need Kim to help you
I
on
was going
that.
to say, I see Kim is around, so Kim can help with that.
Yeah.
Can
Kim,
I,
jump on.
Oh, and Rasaki too. Yeah, go ahead, Rasaki.
Yeah.
so for what it's worth, I think the most consistent compensation has been being able to meet that language to help people. That's been the most greatest compensation in my 13 years, because it's very, it's been researchers that we had with researchers from Arkansas in the rural areas where people are less educated and as well. But it's the opportunity that the study that the researcher is making is so interesting, and a vision that is going to be so impactful. So being able to help them, that's been a great compensation. I don't think that nobody, a card member that's been a part of it, look forward to um, somewhat financial, but the success of the researcher coming back to tell us how successful that research has been.
Mhm. Well, thanks for sharing, Rasaki. Yeah, it was nice that we were able to close that loop with the cards.
Yeah, Kristen, did you want me to speak? So that I think there were a couple questions. I think someone was asking about compensation as well for cards. So I'll just say cards is is compensated $50 per hour for their work. So every meeting are 90 minutes and people receive $75 for their time. And I think this question is like, how do we get the word out about cards? Well, things like this absolutely help. Having researchers share about their experience, having folks like Rasaki present, I think often inspires people to come, and we hope you are inspired to come to cards, and you're very welcome to contact Winners, which is the Wisconsin Network for Research Support if you are. We do a lot of presentations ourselves. Cards members speak quite often as well. And then there's word of mouth and return customers. Cards often has people come back, and they're written into people's grants so that they can get community feedback throughout their research project. Yeah, and it sometimes, studies you can't necessarily form your own board like Kristen did, and cards can serve them in that capacity. So hope that's helpful. And yeah, we'd love to see you all at cards.
Thanks so much, Kim.
Other questions? Now I'm searching the Pecori site for where I found that document. I can't find it. Other questions? Hearing none, please join me in thanking Dr. Pecanac and Rasaki for joining us today. I'm going to remind everyone, please fill out your survey give us feedback on this presentation. This really does help us plan, and we are planning for next year. So love to have your responses. Carla. Can't hear you, Carla. Still can't hear you. Nope, can't hear you. Can you put it in chat? Carla, I'm assuming you're typing something in chat. She is. Okay. Here you go. I think it's a it's a thank you. Love it that we have this amazing community engagement component, Kristen, in your research. It's really important.
Yeah, I really appreciate that comment.
Okay. All right, then don't forget to complete your survey, please, please, please. And thank you again, Kristen and Rasaki, for being with us today.